Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Corporal Christy Adam. Today's ceremony marks the 75th anniversary of the commencement of Australian Squadron's operations with Bomber Command. During the Second World War, Australian aircrew with the Royal Australian Air Force were trained in Australia, Canada and Rhodesia under the Empire Air Training Scheme. This scheme trained Australian aircrew before sending them to the United Kingdom to fly on offensive air operations against the Germans and Italians. Earlier this evening, an FA-18 Hornet flew over the memorial in honour of the Australians who served in Bomber Command. The Hornet was flown by No. 77 Squadron from RAAF Base Williamtown. We are honoured to acknowledge Air Marshal Gavin Davies, Chief of Air Force, and Warrant Officer Robert Swanwick, Warrant Officer of the Air Force. We warmly welcome the Bomber Command veterans and family who join us this evening and who will be attending the Bomber Command wreath-laying ceremony tomorrow morning. Shortly, we will hear the story of Flying Officer Charles Roland Williams, 617 Squadron, who was killed in 1943. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony around Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catafalque party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. Please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is earth by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts, of beauty rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Catapult party, shoulder up.
The Australian War Memorial was a vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Those of you who have a seat, please be seated if you wish to do so. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Charles Roland Williams. Charles Williams was born on the 19th of March, 1909, to Hedwig, the daughter of a German Lutheran minister, and Horace Williams, an English immigrant who ran Bannockburn, a sheep station near the tiny village of Torrens Creek in Queensland. Growing up at Bannockburn, young Charles, known as Charlie, his older brother Horace, known as Doug, and younger sister Sheila were taught by their mother. Charles went on to boarding school in Townsville. Finishing his formal education at the age of 16, Charles took over the running of the station with his brother as their father's health deteriorated. When Australia's involvement in the Second World War was announced, the brothers felt they should serve. Doug joined the Home Army. Charles, who was eager to see the world but had never been further than Brisbane, tried for the Royal Australian Air Force. Called up for training in January 1941, he became an accomplished wireless operator and air gunner, eventually earning a commission as an officer. In July 1942, Charles Williams was assigned to No. 61 Squadron of the Royal Air Force, which was flying 4-engined Lancaster heavy bombers. He was involved in successful missions over Germany against targets at Cologne, Essen, Hamburg, Munich and Bremen, and took part in a daylight raid on Le Creuset in France. Impressed by his steadiness in combat, efficiency and good influence on his younger crewmates, Williams' commanding officer recommended him for the Distinguished Flying Cross. Stationed at RAF Syston, Williams began a relationship with Gwendolyn Parfitt, known as Bobby, who was a secretary at nearby Nottingham. In March 1943, Williams was asked by Flight Lieutenant Norm Barlow, a fellow Australian in 61 Squadron, to join his crew and volunteer for 617 Squadron, a special unit being formed in Scampton. Williams agreed, and in April, the crew were training for a secret mission that involved low flying at night, but was otherwise a mystery. Williams and Gwen became engaged, but Operation Chastise was ready for execution, so the marriage was put off until afterwards, when the crews had been promised leave. Williams was assigned to the second wave of what would later become known as the Dam Busters Raid. On the 16th of May 1943, his Lancaster left Scampton, headed towards Sorpe Dam near Dortmund. Today, the raid is popularly remembered for the success of the bouncing bomb against its primary target, the Mona Dam. However, in order to avoid radar detection and anti-aircraft guns, the aircraft involved flew at altitudes of around 30 metres. This high-risk tactic came at a price. Of 19 aircraft, 8 crashed or were shot down. 53 men died. After crossing the Dutch coast just before midnight, Williams Lancaster flew into electricity pylons and ploughed into a field, where it burned fiercely. Every man on board was killed. The barrel-shaped bomb, codenamed Upkeep, was thrown clear of the crash and recovered later by a leading bomb disposal operator. The crew were buried in a cemetery near Dusseldorf. After the war, they were re-interned to the Reinschwitz Forest British War Cemetery. Although their gravestones were produced to a standardised format, each family was allowed to choose a quotation. The words on Charles Williams' gravestone express the emotions his family must have felt at the death in a faraway land of a country boy from an Australian sheep station. He gallantly died, renouncing all the things that he loved. Charles Roland Williams was 34 years old. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross in 1945. His fiancée, Gwen Parfitt, said of Bomber Command, "May they find the courage that I have found in so much as these men were my friends and Flying Officer C.R. Williams, DFC and Bar, who had asked me to become his wife on that fateful May of 1943. To the end of my life, I shall never forget them. For 70 years, the site of the crash of Williams Lancaster went unmarked. But in 2013, local historian Volker Sherman campaigned to establish a permanent memorial, raising funds from supporters from around the world. On the 17th of May 2015, relatives and representatives of the crew travelled to the unveiling of the memorial, and a wreath was laid in memory of Charles Williams. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour to my left among some 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph today is displayed beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Flying Officer Charles Roland Williams, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. The years shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
Control party, reserve. Control party, shoulder up.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Control party, now words, turn. Control party, clear, march.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. Thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you a very good evening.